Calling this place a palace is like calling the Pacific Ocean a pond. It's a 180-acre machine of absolute power where, for 5 centuries, no man was allowed to spend the night except one. Welcome to the Forbidden City, the world's largest gilded prison. Built by 1 million laborers to mirror the stars and hide a single man's insecurity. This isn't just architecture. It's a cosmological statement written in blood, timber, and 24-karat gold. It was designed to last forever. Yet it became the ultimate symbol of the one thing it couldn't stop: its own inevitable collapse. The Chinese name is Zijingqing, the Purple Forbidden's enclosure. Despite the red walls and yellow roofs, there isn't a drop of purple paint in the place. The purple comes from the sky. Ancient Chinese astronomers looked at the North Star, the unmoving center of the universe. They called the stars surrounding it the Purple Enclosure. It was the VIP lounge of the gods. So when the emperor decided to build a home, he didn't look at Versailles or Buckingham Palace for inspiration. He looked at the cosmos. The logic was terrifyingly simple. If the heavenly emperor lives in a purple enclosure in the sky, his earthly middleman needs a matching set on the ground. But here's the kicker. The man who built this celestial mirror, the Yongle emperor, wasn't even supposed to be on the throne. He was the classic angry uncle who launched a brutal civil war against his own nephew to seize power. When the nephew conveniently disappeared in a palace fire, Yongle took the crown. He named his reign Perpetual Happiness. Now, if you have to name your era Perpetual Happiness after burning down your family's house, you're clearly overcompensating. To prove he was the legitimate son of heaven, he needed a stage so overwhelming that no one would dare question his resume. He needed a fortress that looked like a prayer. The result was an engineering madness that makes the pyramids look like a weekend DIY project. They moved 200-ton slabs of marble, not by wheels, but by manipulating the weather. In the dead of winter, they dug wells every few hundred yards. They flooded the roads to create a massive highway of ice. Then they sledged the foundations of an empire into place. It was 1 million people working for 14 years. They built a 9,000-room cage. It was the peak of human achievement, and the beginning of a 500-year countdown to a disaster the emperor never saw coming. To understand why the Forbidden City exists, we have to talk about a family reunion that ended in a massacre. Think of it as the ultimate succession drama, but with more fire and fewer lawyers. In the late 14th century, the founder of the Ming Dynasty made a fatal mistake. He skipped over his battle-hardened sons and left the throne to his teenage grandson. One of those sons, Zhu Di, was an ambitious general with a massive army and a very bruised ego. He wasn't the type of uncle to just send a birthday card. In 1399, he launched a brutal 3-year civil war that turned the capital, Nanjing, into a furnace. When the smoke cleared, the nephew had vanished in a palace fire, and Zhu Di walked over the ashes to claim the crown. He named his reign Yongle, meaning perpetual happiness, which, let's be honest, is a bit of a gaslight when you just incinerated your own family to get the job. But here is why this matters to you. An emperor who steals a throne is an emperor with a massive PR problem. In Nanjing, he was a usurper surrounded by ghosts. He needed a fresh start, a stage so grand it would make his right to rule look like a law of nature. In 1406, he ordered the construction of a new imperial capital in his old power base, Beijing. He wasn't just moving the furniture. He was commanding the earth to submit. If you think modern logistics are impressive, the Forbidden City was the Amazon of the 15th century. While European kings were still huddling in damp stone castles, with a dozen drafty rooms, Yongle was moving mountains. Huge logs of precious timber were sourced from primeval forests thousands of miles away. It could take years just to float a single tree to the capital, but the real engineering madness was the stone. They needed gargantuan marble slabs for the palace floors. some weighing over 200 tons, roughly the weight of a Boeing 747. And here is the wow moment. They didn't have wheels that could carry that much weight, so they hacked the weather. In the dead of winter, workers dug wells every few hundred yards along the route, flooded the roads to create a frozen superhighway, and sledged the foundations of an empire across the ice. It took 20,000 men to move just one of these stones. This was a project that consumed 1 million laborers and 100,000 artisans over 14 years. It's the equivalent of a modern nation spending its entire GDP to build a space station on the moon. By October 1420, the palace was complete. Yongle had his celestial mirror, his proof that he was the son of heaven. He died 5 years later, likely believing his own perpetual happiness height. But in building this fortress to protect himself from his past, he accidentally built a cage. He created a world so rigid and so isolated that the very walls designed to keep the world out would eventually prevent the emperors from seeing the world change. He built the perfect palace for a dynasty that would eventually forget how to survive outside of it. If you wanted to build a house that whispered, "I am a god," to everyone who looked at it, how would you do it? You wouldn't just hire an architect. You'd hire a cosmologist. Every single stone in the Forbidden City was an intentional statement. The layout isn't just a floor plan. It's a celestial map pulled down from the stars. The entire complex sits on a precise north-south axis, the central axis of Beijing. The palace faces south to catch the maximum sunlight, while behind it to the north sits Jingshan Hill, an artificial mountain made from the very earth dug out of the moat. In feng shui principles, that hill is a massive spiritual backstop, protecting the emperor from the negative energy and cold winds of the north. It's a bit like having a security system that protects you from ghosts and the weather at the same time. To understand the scale, you have to walk the gauntlet. You start at the south, passing the Gate of Heavenly Peace, where Mao's portrait hangs today, and cross the Golden Water River via 5 marble bridges. The central bridge, the widest and most ornate, was for the emperor alone. Then you hit the Meridian Gate, or Woman, a massive 5-towered fortress where the emperor reviewed his troops and issued edicts. Step inside, and you're in a courtyard so vast it could hold 100,000 people. That is more than a modern NFL stadium, all built to make a visitor feel like an ant in the presence of a giant. At the center of this world sits the Hall of Supreme Harmony. It was the most important building in China for 500 years. Standing 30 meters high, it houses the Dragon Throne, the focal point of the entire empire. The colors here aren't just for decoration. They were strictly enforced branding. The roof tiles are yellow, a color reserved exclusively for the emperor. Under Ming law, if a noble or a merchant dared to put yellow tiles on their house, it was a capital offense. Apparently, the emperor took color coordination very, very seriously. The walls are red for joy, and everywhere you look, you see the number 9. 9 bays on the hall, 9 rows of studs on the gates, 9 dragons on the walls. Why? Because in Chinese numerology, 9 is the largest single digit associated with heaven and the long-lasting reign of the emperor. This was a civilization that had mastered the art of the cosmological statement. The emperor wasn't just a politician. He was the Tianzi, the son of heaven. His palace was the proof that he was the link between the divine and the mortal. It was an overwhelming display of engineering peaks and psychological dominance. But here is the paradox. In creating a world so perfectly aligned with the stars, the Ming emperors were slowly detaching themselves from the earth. By building a fortress that mirrored heaven, they were inadvertently creating a bubble that made it impossible to see the reality of the people they ruled. They were becoming gods in a city that would eventually become their gilded prison. Imagine a city the size of a small country where, by law, there is only one complete man allowed to spend the night. Welcome to the inner court, the most exclusive, high-stakes psychological experiment in human history. At its peak, this 180-acre compound housed between 2,000 and 10,000 people. But unless you were the emperor or his young sons, you were either a woman or a eunuch. It was a world of gilded isolation, where the Ming and Qing dynasties reached a level of administrative perfection that would make a Silicon Valley CEO sweat, all while being completely untethered from reality. To run this machine, the empire relied on a shadow army of eunuchs. We aren't talking about a few dozen servants. At the height of the Ming dynasty, there were an estimated 70,000 eunuchs in the imperial system. They managed everything from the emperor's dinner to his top-secret edicts. They were the ultimate gatekeepers, and in some eras, they were the ones actually pulling the strings of the world's largest economy. Think of them as the executive assistants who eventually realized they didn't actually need the boss to sign the checks. Some, like the infamous Wei Zhongshan, became the de facto rulers of China, while the emperor played with his carpentry tools. Then there was the concubine system, a brutal, high society hierarchy that makes The Bachelor look like a friendly game of checkers. Thousands of girls were selected from across the empire, ranked, and filed away into 9,000 rooms. For most, life was a repetitive cycle of waiting for an audience that might never come. It was a world governed by rank. Your food, your clothes, even the number of servants you had was determined by your status. It was the ultimate golden cage, magnificent on the outside, but psychologically hollow on the inside. But don't think the emperor was just lounging around. For a son of heaven, the job description was a 24/7 grind. Take the Yongzheng emperor, a man so legendarily hardworking, he reportedly slept only 4 hours a night and personally reviewed thousands of documents, scribbling notes in red ink until dawn. He was the ultimate micromanager of a billion-dollar enterprise. Or take Qianlong, the ultimate art collector who assembled a library and art collection that would put the Louvre to shame. He even built his own private retirement garden just to have a place to think, because apparently, even a god needs a break from being a god. This was the peak of the most advanced civilization, a place where the smartest men on earth perfected the art of governing a world they were legally forbidden from seeing. Imagine ghosting your own empire for 20 years, while the West was navigating the Renaissance and the early rumblings of modern science. The Wanli Emperor, the man running the world's largest bureaucracy, simply stopped showing up to work. He didn't answer petitions. He didn't fill government vacancies. He essentially put the Ming Dynasty on Do Not Disturb for 2 decades. It turns out that when the link between heaven and earth stops checking his inbox, the earth starts to rot. This is the tragic flaw of absolute power. A machine this perfect only works if someone is actually sitting at the controls. But Wanli was a model of stability compared to the Zhejiang emperor. Jia Jing became so obsessed with Taoist alchemy and finding the elixir of immortality that he turned the inner court into a giant high-stakes chemistry lab. He was paranoid, ruthless, and so cruel to his household that in 1542, a group of his own concubines decided they'd rather face execution and spend another night in his company. They crept into his bedroom and tried to strangle the Son of Heaven with a hemp rope. He survived, but the psychological damage was done. He spent the last 20 years of his reign hiding in a private complex, ruling by written edict like a medieval hermit with a nuclear arsenal. By 1644, the Ming Mirror of Heaven was shattered. A rebel army of peasants was at the gates, and the last Ming ruler, Chongzhen, realized that all the yellow tiles and dragon carvings in the world couldn't stop a hungry population. In a final cinematic act of despair, he walked to Jingshan Hill, the artificial mountain built to protect the palace, and hanged himself from a tree. He left a note pinned to his robe. I am ashamed to face my ancestors. Let the rebels not harm a single one of my people. It was a heartbreaking end for a dynasty that began with such cosmic arrogance. The Qing Dynasty Manchu outsiders from the north walked into the vacuum and moved into the Forbidden City for the next 268 years. They were shrewd. They kept the palace exactly as it was, to prove they were the legitimate heirs to the mandate of heaven. Under great emperors like Kangxi and Qianlong, the empire reached its absolute peak, expanding its borders and its art collections to a scale that made the contemporary courts of Europe look like provincial outposts. But the 19th century brought a new kind of storm, the Opium Wars and the Boxer Rebellion. Suddenly, the most advanced civilization was being dismantled by industrial powers they didn't understand. The final blow came in 1912, when a 6-year-old named Hui abdicated the throne. The 500-year experiment of the Son of Heaven was over. A dynasty is a long-distance race where the finish line is often a cliff. The Forbidden City came dangerously close to being nothing more than a memory 3 times. The first was in 1931, when the Japanese invaded. Fearing the loss of China's soul, curators secretly packed the most precious imperial treasures into 13,000 crates. These artifacts, paintings, bronzes, jade, and calligraphy embarked on a frantic, decade-long odyssey across a war-torn continent. Today, that collection is split by history. Nearly 3,000 of those crates sit in the National Palace Museum in Taipei, while the rest remain in Beijing. It is a family inheritance divided by a geopolitical wall, a staggering treasure that survived a world war only to be separated by a civil one. The second near miss was the arrival of the modern world in the 1950s. As Beijing was reimagined as a socialist capital, urban planners looked at the Forbidden City's ancient walls as feudal remnants. They tore down the city's outer walls to widen roads, and there were serious proposals to demolish the palace itself to build factories. Imagine if France had decided to turn Versailles into a steel mill, or if the US had replaced the capital with a warehouse. The most advanced civilization was on the verge of cannibalizing its own history. But the most dramatic moment came in 1966, during the Cultural Revolution. Red Guard units assembled at the gates with hammers, intent on smashing the physical embodiment of the Four Olds. The palace was saved only because Premier Zhou Enlai personally ordered the gates locked and stationed the army to guard them. The greatest wooden palace in the world survived for 500 years against emperors and invaders, only to nearly fall to a group of teenagers with a mission. Today, the Forbidden City is the most visited museum on Earth, recording over 17 million visitors a year. To put that wow factor in perspective, its collection holds nearly 2 million artifacts, 4 times as many as the Louvre in Paris. Every day, 80,000 people walk the same central axis that the Yongle Emperor aligned with the stars in 1406. That axis hasn't moved. Even today, Mao's portrait hangs on the gate exactly where the imperial power once sat. The names have changed, the ideologies have flipped, but the gravitational pull of this celestial mirror remains the political and psychological heart of China. Standing in the silence of the Hall of Supreme Harmony today, you realize the Forbidden City was never just about housing an emperor. It was a 500-year experiment in the limits of human control. We admire the genius, the million laborers, the ice highways, and the alignment with the stars, but we often miss the tragedy. This place was the ultimate echo chamber. By the time the world outside these walls changed, the men living within these 9,000 rooms were the last to know. The lesson here isn't just about ancient China. It's about the gilded cages we build for ourselves today. We surround ourselves with walls of data, algorithms, and social circles that only tell us what we want to hear. We convince ourselves that our systems are too advanced to fail, that our purple enclosures are impenetrable. But as the last Ming emperor discovered on Jingshan Hill, no amount of yellow tile can protect a leader who has lost touch with the ground. History tells us that the most dangerous place to be is inside a perfect system that refuses to look out the window. The Forbidden City was built to be a mirror of heaven perfect, eternal, and unchanging. But we live on Earth. And on Earth, the only thing that truly lasts is change. As you look at these ancient red walls today, ask yourself, in your own life, what are the walls you are building right now that are keeping the world out?